Hi, everybody. Welcome again to another episode of the ShopNotes Podcast. Today is episode number 121. I'm your host, Phil Huber, joined by Logan Whitmer and special guest, Dillon Baker, design editor at Woodsmith Magazine. On today's episode, we are going to talk about woodworking influences as well as side hustles. Hope you enjoy today's show. I want to do a special promotional message here from Shaper Tools. They're the makers of the Shaper Origin. It's the handheld CNC router that brings digital precision to the craft of woodworking. You could tackle joinery, cabinetry, hardware installation, and more with speed and precision. And you could try it risk-free in your shop for 30 days. Visit shapertools.com to learn more. All right. So today, last week we talked about my decision not to have a table saw in my shop, of which there were several comments that ran the gamut, as you might imagine. So I would just want to read a couple of them here. Jim writes, I have a bandsaw and a circular saw with guide tracks. I've said goodbye to the table saw, the router table, and the drill press. Also, wow. I don't have a planer or a jointer. I have a collection of very good hand saws and planes. My favorite planes are all wooden bodied, either the EC Emmerich or hand built by me. They're much lighter to use for long periods, and the Emmerich and Hock blades sharpen to a very keen edge and hold it. There's nothing I am restricted from doing, nothing I find I can't do, and I enjoy the relatively quiet and mostly dust-free environment. Don writes, what a waste of hot air. I've been a carpenter since I was 13 and I'm now 73 and still working as a cabinet maker plus solid surface fabricator and installer. My table saw is and always will be my mainstay. So, and then one other guy wrote, let's see. Phil talked about his enjoyment of using hand tools, which prompted me to wonder what TV or other woodworkers influenced you guys the most. Roy Underhill and Norm Abram influenced me equally, leading to no preference of hand tools or power tools. I simply use what makes the most sense. And I do have a table saw and a track saw. So that's kind of where I thought we'd get started with today's episode was who are the woodworkers that have influenced your growth or development as a woodworker? And go.
Well, I have to think on this or I'm just going to ramble, which I'm probably going to ramble anyways. So why don't you go ahead and start and I'll come up with a good ramble.
Yeah, that's an unintended consequence of podcasting anyway. So, well, definitely, I think the earliest exposure for me was, probably aligns with the last comment. I grew up watching Roy Underhill on PBS and, even watching the Woodsmith show early on. And then I also had the good fortune of having a grandfather who was an incredible carver. So again, I was just kind of always around those sort of things. Even This Old House and what was the other one? The Yankee Workshop with Norm Abram. So, I'm a PBS kid, and so I was kind of first exposed by watching those and then being around my grandfather. But I think that a lot of my more, I would say, influential in terms of just style and the way I think about designing furniture comes from or began in college. I had a couple of professors that were, one didn't have a strong woodworking background, but when the other one was on leave, he kind of took over that role, and it was always kind of a passion of his. And so he went to the College of the Redwoods, trained at under Krenov, and he ended up teaching woodworking for an extended period of time until Chris Martin, who Logan actually knows, was my furniture design teacher at Iowa State. And, his style, and then just, I would say the two studio furniture makers that were coming out of probably like the 60s, 70s, and 80s, Wendell Castle and Gary Knox Bennett, RIP to both, were pretty influential, I think, in just kind of sparking that interest in building furniture, but also treating furniture like art too. So that I think it was a concept that was always kind of hanging in the balance for me. Was, again, I've touched on this a little bit about just justifying your art, and I like just the utilitarian aspect and the functionality of, fusing furniture and art together. And I think those guys did it exceptionally well, and we're kind of pushing the boundary in terms of, what is furniture, what is art, why can't they be both? And we're kind of, I would say, kind of renegades in their own way. But those are probably the main people that I think about most frequently.
All right. Well, I'll let Logan answer his too for his influences now that he's had ample time to come up with a ramble.
I've just been watching birds. I would say, I wouldn't say that there was any one woodworker necessarily that I take a lot of influence from. Like, of course, everybody's work ends up reflecting themselves and what they enjoy. So I would say, I mean, if I'm going to say I watched somebody and kind of followed their work for a long time, David Marks is definitely on that list, which consequently I'm flying out to his place on Sunday this week. So that'll be super cool. I get a fanboy. It's going to be fun. As a whole, I'm just going to say the shaker style is my big, I mean, not to pin it on any one woodworker, but I just enjoy the shaker style. Like, it's the simplicity of that design, the straightforward construction, and I like the mentality that the shakers have of something is perfect as long as it completes its function. So as long as it does what it's intended to do, it's perfect. Doesn't matter about the construction or anything. So, woodworking heroes, that's hard for me to say. I'm putting David Marks in that category. I mean, of course, there are people that are really in depth with the shaker style. Chris Bexford, there's a lot of people that do that style and do it very, very well. That I enjoy their work. Okay, no, I'm gonna retrace everything I just said. Now, I'm not going to say that he's not necessarily a furniture maker, but Bill Carter is definitely one of my heroes as far as the woodworking world goes. Now, he's a tool maker. He is a cabinet maker and a carpenter by trade, but he also he's really well known as a tool maker. So that's kind of, I'm gonna put Bill Carter and David Marks in the same category. So if I was going to say I had woodworking idols, I'm not going to necessarily say they're my influences, but they're my idols. So
you don't have shrines at your house where you put out an offering?
No, not really.
Well, I mean, I think there's different ways of looking at it too, because I think listening to Dillon talk made me think that there's probably influences that we have in the sense of opening the door to woodworking, like to get you started. And it sounds like that's how Norm and Roy were for Dillon, even though you're maybe not directly influenced by their style, so to speak.
Sure.
But then you have other influences in the sense that, whether it's design or tooling or construction choices that will influence how you build your projects, that you're going to assemble a lot of those ingredients, so to speak, and kind of come up with your own soup on what makes a project look good.
Yeah, it's almost kind of like a permission, not that anyone thinks as an adult you need permission to do anything, but it is, those are just, again, examples that you're kind of going back to again, you're not exactly extracting the particular style. It's just you're knowing that it's like creating an inventory of what's acceptable and what's been done, and kind of trying to navigate that. And again, if you're constantly creating, designing stuff, you never want to be short of that permission or knowing that what's possible. So, because you definitely do get the fatigue, I can tell you that. I'm suffering from it right now on a particular project. So it's nice to look back and see what's been done before you.
Yeah, because I would think, like when I, thinking about those, definitely I watched a lot of Norm Abram. Our PBS station didn't have, or it wasn't on at a time that I was watching Roy that much. When I did watch him, it was always kind of fun, but it was just interesting to watch Norm work, because it opened up the sense of, oh, like you can do that, and gave me that option. My dad was a big influence on getting me started, just because nothing got in his way of doing stuff and building projects. And he didn't have Norm's shop full of tools, but what he did have, he still used and got projects built, Yeah. So, but
Phil, I was to say, I have to ask you, what was your sense of like joy and wonderment when you saw the new Yankee Workshop go from that black and white episode to the first color episode?
Well, it was like when I was
like, oh, walnut's that color. What?
Yeah,
they call it. They call
it's
those
like when
talkies.
I was in the theater and watched Wizard of Oz too. It was along those very same lines.
Vaudevillian woodworking.
Yeah.
I couldn't resist that.
I mean, were there any other, again, outside of, we've been giving Norm a lot of praise today. But, outside of that, as you kind of grew into it, are there any other particular people that you maybe default to when you're, generating project ideas, or just kind of, trying to keep things fresh in your mind?
Yeah. So, like my dad subscribed to Woodsmith and ShopNotes. So, I mean, that design aesthetic was with me for a long time.
Yeah, you were indoctrinated at a young age.
Right. Right. So it's only it's very, the circle is now complete that I'm working at Woodsmith. But, but that time Woodsmith was had a lot of shaker projects in it. So I understand Logan's interest there. Since getting into woodworking deeper after college, and then starting here, like I was really influenced. Christian Bexford is a good one. Michael Fortune, just in his construction techniques.
Yeah,
I don't know
great.
that his style is a little out there for me, but there's a lot of stuff that I've learned from him in terms of methods of work.
Yeah, for sure.
And approaches to different things. And then I've gone in waves too, where there's just been, I think a lot of woodworkers go through a craftsman / arts and crafts phase. I think because of it shares a lot of similarities with shaker stuff in that it's heavily rectilinear, or can be. And so the joinery and construction is pretty straightforward on stuff, and but that provides a pretty big sandbox to build stuff in too.
Yeah.
I've always liked, once I got to know or interested in him, was Tay Frid, the guy from the kind of a Danish modern guy that was at Fine Woodworking for a long time early on. Steve Latta and his kind of federal styles. There's a lot of fun stuff in the federal period. I ended up finding, I don't know that I can name, Sam Malouf. I really, like, everybody thinks of him in terms of his, very sculptural flowing chairs, but I like the look of a lot of his case pieces and tables and benches that he's done. And I think there's more room for exploration in that area than to just do, another quote unquote sculpted rocker kind of thing.
Yeah, I think Warren Eschrick kind of falls in that same category. I mean, he would have predated Sam Malouf, but again, I think they're that combining, just very traditional joinery and getting these pieces together, but then again, relying heavily on sculpting, whether it be with pneumatic tools or hand tools, where they do become very gestural and kind of just an extension of, it's like a 3D drawing almost.
Right. Probably in the last few years, after quite a number of years of kind of trying to dismiss him a little bit in my own head, and you and I have talked about this, Dillon, is James Krenoff.
Sure.
Because I think, well, in my own woodworking journey, early on, to me, it was about building projects. And there's a contemplative side of people like Krenoff and Nakashima and whatever that dives heavier into philosophy, I guess, or I don't know, the spiritual side of woodworking.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
that just kind of just blew past me in the practical era that I was working in.
To your point, a lot of their stuff has always just been they're very recognizably, like, George Nakashima pieces are George Nakashima pieces, even though everybody today has some form of a live edge or waterfall table or something like that.
Yeah.
But same goes for Krenoff. I mean, it'd be easy for anybody to recognize which one's a Krenoff, and if you can't quite tell in a photograph, if you see it in person, because they're about 4 feet tall. So, yeah, they were definitely more kind of mission and philosophy driven, which again, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. It kind of justifies the means, right?
Yeah.
So
I guess I fall more under the category of, I would like to build pieces based on somebody else's work, but not necessarily try to adopt some of their styles. You know what I mean? Now, Shaker as a whole, I guess, maybe. I just enjoy that minimalist type thing. But I also follow the same way with turning. Because there are many different turners that have very unique styles. Like, there are, you can show pieces from well-known turners, and I can probably point out who turned it because I know those people's styles. The piece over Phil's shoulder, that big green one, is actually based on a piece that Cindy Drozda has done. Not that one. And Cindy Drozda has a very unique, particular style. It's not that, I'm not going to say she's an influence. It's just I want to try to turn some of those type of pieces, just to kind of see what the technique is and what the mentality. I guess that's where some of what you guys are talking about comes in. Is I want to see where her mentality is when looking at a piece and say, oh, here's how I see what I can do with it, but not necessarily adapt that to my style. Now, 20 years down the road, will my style be a derivative of a lot of these people that I've tried to emulate pieces from? Maybe. Yeah. I feel like I am the only woodworker in the world that has never watched Norm Abram.
Oh, yeah?
Never. Like a clip here and there. Never remember watching a episode of the New Yankee Workshop, ever.
it takes a lot of guts to admit.
Just never did.
So, we've talked about past influences. Are there people that you continue to follow now? I mean, because, like Dillon and I and Logan, we've talked about people that are long dead, other than Bill Carter.
And David Marks, wow.
And David Marks, yeah. Wow.
Phil, jeez. I mean, I think there are, but the problem is like how I don't know how that to me that's a weird question because it's like the people today have been influenced by the people of yesterday.
Right. I guess I also
So
wonder,
it's
the benefit, both the benefit and detriment of our current age is the fact that we have access to so many different furniture
Yeah.
makers and designers, but also it's such a passing connection, that it's, on the one side you get a wider exposure. On the downside, it's very catalog-y, Instagram, just images flipping
Yes.
past rather than, reading or concentrating on any one particular person or style.
yeah.
I don't know. We actually did. I don't know if it was a full article that we did with her or, but Danielle Rose Bird,
Yeah.
she does those carvings. She just had a book come out. I find her work pretty inspiring. It's interesting because it's kind of a cross between carving, but she's not really limited to just like these vessels. Like she's always kind of changing the form, which I think is just kind of warranted by just the type of carving she does, where these things actually look like artifacts. And then she uses a lot of color in her work too.
Sure.
And I think a part of it too is one, like she's young, she's doing it, she's successful, but it's also just such a departure from most of the stuff that I do. I mean, if I was, say I had some passion project or just something I wanted to build outside of work, I hardly ever think about carving anything. And I think sometimes you just kind of have to force yourself to do these disciplines because I more times than not, if I do, I'm just surprised by how much I really enjoy doing it. And it's just something that's been tabled for so long. We've got a project coming up that we're doing some marquetry work, which I don't know if we've ever done marquetry. And if we did, we've probably done it on a really limited scale. I personally have done none. So again, it's just an opportunity to really dive into a discipline within woodworking that, again, that we're not as familiar with. So again, usually people that are doing stuff that's kind of contrasted to mine. And another person I look at a lot, and I did a project for Pop Wood. I think it's probably been well over a year now. My sense of time isn't great, but I did a project where it was a sheet of plywood. I did a plywood chair, and it was trying to limit the amount of waste on the piece of plywood. And I was able to get 2 of this chair out of one 4x8 sheet. And that was a directive or project that was assigned to me in school. But there's a guy that has a company called Effin Furniture, and he does these plywood pieces of furniture that are anywhere from, I think pretty much like he tries to stay within like 98 to 99% use of the board, and they're all CNC'd, so he doesn't have to worry about, circular saw cut pass like we did on ours. But it's just a different way of thinking about constructing something. A lot of the design is based on using as much of the material as possible and limiting your amount of waste. So it's just, again, an interesting way of thinking about the projects or the type of work you're doing. I also just think Baltic birch and plywood furniture is really cool. So, but I think those are 2 current people that come to mind for me, at least.
Yeah.
I would say from a woodworking standpoint, there isn't anybody that like I enjoy and recognize that everybody's style is different, and I appreciate each in their own way. But I want to say anybody like currently today I follow super closely, and kind of make sure I'm always seeing what they're doing. Not from a furniture standpoint, from a turning standpoint. There's a guy out in Ireland. His name's Pat Carroll. I've probably mentioned him in the past, and I'm going to be shooting some projects with him here in August, I believe. And Pat's one of those that I think his work 30 years from now will really stand out. Pat Carroll and Nick Agar. Nick's from England. He currently lives in the States, Georgia, South Carolina, somewhere over there. And they are, both of them, Nick and Pat are both very artistic type turners, so they kind of do like studio type work. They're not a Richard Raffin or a Mike Mahoney or anybody that's doing like bowls or a Glenn Lucas. They're not mass producing bowls. They're not production turners. They're more of studio pieces where their turning may have them. They may have 80 hours in a turning because a lot of it is a lot of pyromancy or stuff, pyrography on it after it's been done and whatever. So those are two guys that I follow pretty closely from a turning standpoint.
Okay. I mean, I like Daniel Rosebird's stuff. I like seeing Nancy Hiller's work in terms of how she works within styles. Like her cabinetry work is informed by the house that it sits in. So I don't know that she, you can't necessarily line up all of her pieces and be like, this is the Nancy Hiller style, but she knows how to interpret different styles and work within them. I mean, I fanboy Dave Fisher, who's a teacher and a carver, and I like to do that kind of carving stuff, but I don't know. And my stuff is definitely influenced by that because I like his style, but I'm not necessarily trying to copy it per se. It's just his tooling choices and techniques really appeal to me, and I want to see what I can do with it that way, especially as a counterpoint to some of my furniture work. It's just a different change of pace, like you were saying, Dillon, about having something that's just unique and it pushes you in a different direction.
Yeah, it's always about kind of certainly redefining, but just trying to kind of change the language and figure out, instead of because it's really easy just to kind of focus on one thing and trying to, again, when we're going through these matrices, to try and decide which projects go in our issues to make sure we have the most kind of comprehensive issue. It's really easy to just kind of get hung up on one thing. And so you kind of have to just remain receptive. Yeah. I mean, receptive is probably the best word. I mean, again, it's really easy to get stuck. And so you need to immerse yourself in several different things to kind of get yourself in a place where you can make some concrete decisions about your project. So,
yeah. So I think for me, it's really fun to be able to have that access to a wide variety of styles and construction choices. But then also I enjoy being able to pause and really get into a specific designer or design school or something like that to learn more about it. Like what are the elements that came up with it. But so today's episode is brought to you by Shaper Tools. They're the makers of the Shaper Origin, the handheld CNC router that brings digital precision to the craft of woodworking. You can tackle joinery, cabinetry, hardware installation, and more with speed and precision. You could try it risk-free in your shop for 30 days. Visit shapertools.com to learn more. Anyway, switching gears a little bit, since both of you are on the episode, what I wanted to talk a little bit about, and I think a lot of woodworkers think about, dream about to a certain extent, is making some money from your woodworking rather than just spending money on your woodworking. And
I thought you were going to say the difference between Dillon and Logan.
Yeah. We can go over that too.
Right.
Just differentiating that we are two separate people.
Because what most
even
people...
though we get...
What's really funny is there's kind of a little bit of an inside joke here at Woodsmith is Dillon and Logan often get called Logan and Dillon for reasons that are very mystifying and yet quite humorous, because you guys don't sound alike, you don't really look alike. And I think it happened was with John and I, and then all of a sudden it was like other people without us saying a word. So if you're watching on the YouTubes, you can see that Logan and Dillon are essentially twins, separated from birth.
Yeah.
It's just really funny to me how that happened.
And it like transcends brands. Like,
oh yeah,
like the Woodsmith brand, people do it. That we work with every day. Like, I'll walk in the studio and John will turn around and be like, "Hey, Dillon, I mean Logan, like, John, I sit next to you, man." But then like somebody from accounting does it, and it's like, really? Like, I mean, at this point, it's just humorous.
Yeah, well, it's clearly a systemic issue.
I thought that's where you were going with people. People dream about it and they think about it, and they're just mystified by how we are two separate people. They don't understand it.
Yeah. So anyway, what I wanted to talk about with you guys is you have full-time jobs here, but you also do various side hustles. And I just wanted you both to have the opportunity to talk about your side hustles in the way of, how do you look at it? Is it more for your enjoyment of the craft or to make some money on the side, or, and how you go about, choosing what you do in order to do that?
Well, I think it's definitely a level of freedom that only really comes along with having a full-time job, because, you're not really reliant on the income from the quote unquote side hustle. I don't know how often Logan does sawmilling stuff, but I mean, I just have, as of recently, been hitting a little bit of a stride with having, somewhat consistent work. But I will say that it comes with a great freedom of being able to turn things down that you just either don't want to do, you don't have time to do, or it's just not really worth your while. And really it takes doing a lot of these things to kind of figure that out. And Logan and I talk about it quite a bit, because we find ourselves in the shop cursing ourselves or something we're working on. Like, why do we keep doing this? We're gluttons for punishment. But, in a lot of the work that I get now is just, I think it comes out of, when I was working somewhat full-time for myself out of college. And so people kind of, through knowing people and doing stuff for people in the past, work has kind of trickled or found its way back into my life. And I like to stick with more furniture-oriented projects. I don't really like doing furniture repair work. If it's something that I feel like I can do fairly easily and isn't tedious and time-consuming, I'll take it on. Or if I feel like it's a little bit of a challenge and it'd be fun to tackle, I'll do it. I really try to stay away from doing like fabrication or like contractor style work. I'm not against it by any means. I don't think highly of myself. It's just something I don't really desire to do, and there's enough people out there that can do it. Now, if it's something I think I can crank out in a weekend, again, a lot of it is just kind of project contingent, but I typically try to stay away from anything where I'm not really designing anything, or it's not a challenge, I guess, worth for me to take on. I've done some refinishing work, which, short of doing a tabletop, isn't really that fun, but it is kind of cool to mess around with the chemistry of finishes and kind of see how tinting lacquer or doing sealers and that sort of thing, stuff that we don't really do a ton for the magazine. Usually it's like we have a stain and then we use catalyzed lacquer, it works fine. It photographs well. So again, it's kind of like on a case by case basis, but it does. I will say, I'm now working full time as a designer and builder for the magazine. It's given me at least the freedom to kind of pick and choose what I want to do, because I'll do like 3 projects in a row and then I just swear off that I'm never going to do that stuff again, and then a couple months go by and somebody wants me to do something. I'm like, all right, I'll do it,
Yeah.
But
I say, how do you price your work then? Like if you're doing, because I mean, I know the type of stuff you've been doing for people. So how do you give somebody a price? Because you're doing some versions of commercial work, as far as doing work for commercial spaces, restaurants, bars, stuff like that. How do you price that type of stuff?
Well, I definitely underbid my work, just because I think it's we all deal with this. It's just we have an idea of what our time is worth, but try explaining that to somebody who doesn't do any sort of woodworking or doesn't have any, or I don't want to say they don't have another talent, but maybe they don't have another way of generating revenue, whether they're in some sort of craft or trade. So it's a hard conversation to have. You know, there's people that obviously are of means, and you know, the money factor isn't that much of a hurdle. There's also people that are very affluent too, that are really tight with money, and it's hard to explain to them, you know. But back to your point, Logan, you know, if I'm doing smaller stuff, so a lot of times if I'm doing like chop boards or cutting boards and stuff for people for gifts, like those types of items, I'll typically charge per item. If I'm doing a lot of the fabrication work stuff I've been doing for a couple of the restaurants in town, I usually, of course, charge for all the materials, but then I just do it on an hourly basis. I'm sure I end up spending a little bit of extra time and, you know, lose a little bit of money that way. But yeah, it's smaller projects, it's usually by the project or per project, and then, you know, larger stuff like the DJ booth I did and the flower boxes, I basically just did by the hour. It's just easier to do it that way because it's being built for the first time. So what is it worth? Well, it's worth what someone else is willing to pay for it. So
yeah, that's true. So like, well, it's interesting because I don't take on commission pieces hardly ever. Like, I just don't. I don't care to.
But you had tried at one point.
Oh,
right?
I've done them. I don't. My preference is not to do them. And my preference has always been not to do them. I will if there is an interest there. If it's for a friend, it has to tick all these boxes. If I have an interest in it, if it's for a friend, and I don't think it's going to soak up an absolute boatload of time, then I will. I prefer not to do furniture projects. I guess I'm in the position, I think we're all in the position that anything we do outside of work, we don't need to do. Like, we don't need the supplemental income off of it. So it's never one of those like for money things, or I'm doing it for the money. It's always one of those like I'm doing it because, like I said, it's for a friend, it's for somebody I know, it's an interesting challenge, I guess. That's the bigger thing, is it just is an interesting challenge to me. If I'm going to do something outside of the day-to-day work that we do, you know, my quote side hustle then is sawmilling. I have been too busy the last several months to, I keep getting suckered into doing these sawmilling jobs because, oh, hey, somebody referred you to me because you sawmilled for them and stuff, and I've been turning them down. Like, I just don't have the time to go do it. If, you know, I will sawmill for myself still, and I sawmill to keep an inventory of lumber here, and then that's kind of my side hustle now. That's my preference for my side hustle is selling lumber, because I can cut it on my time, I can let it dry, I can bring it to the kiln on my time, and then when it's dry and ready and sitting here, I can sell it on my time. So I can do it burden free, I guess. So like, I don't have that. I hate that weight of a project sitting on me. You know what I mean?
It's just like an encumbrance.
It is. I don't like the feeling of obligation with a project. Now, with that being said, the most, and that's why I asked how you price your stuff, Dillon, because to me, the best bang for my buck is, so if I'm looking at sawmilling, or if I'm looking at my side hustles, I'm making the least money by doing commission pieces. Because what I put into it per hour and what I'm going to get out of it is low. I'm looking at opportunity cost at that point. If I'm looking at a furniture piece that's going to cost, take me 10 hours to build, let's just say 10 hours. And when I do build commission pieces for people, I just say, hey, look, you're going to pay me the material price, and then I'm going to tell you the hours I have into it. You pay me what you think is fair. It's a terrible way to do it, but because I'm doing these generally for friends and family, that's how I do it. So that usually ends up being pretty minimal as far as the hourly rate. My sawmilling, however, I charge $100 an hour on the sawmill. So my opportunity cost there is I'm losing money if I do a commission piece. If a commission piece is going to take me 10 hours, I might make $500 at the end of the day. Well, I could have made $1,000 on the sawmill. Now I have other stuff in there. But at the same time, that's me going and pulling the sawmill with somebody. So, if I'm going to sawmill for 10 hours, that's going to be $1,000. Okay. If at the end of the day, after blades and fuel, I might walk away with $750, $800. In that same amount of time, a 10-hour sawmilling day sitting here at my place, and I'm sawmilling my own lumber, I can probably whip out 2,000 board feet of walnut. Okay. That 2,000 board feet of walnut, after kiln drying and losing some to degradation through the drying process, I might yield 1,500 board feet, and I sell that 1,500 board feet at $5 a board foot. So at that instance, my 10-hour day that I had sawmilling at $1,000 for the day has turned into a $7,500 day with all that walnut. Now there's inventory space and all that type of stuff you got to take into consideration, but that's kind of how I look at it. It's like, if I'm going to do something outside my normal work, sawmilling for inventory is always the top of the list if I have the time to do it, because that's the most valuable for me. And again, I want to make the point that while we are starving editors and designers, we don't have to do this outside of work for the money. I do it for the enjoyment of it. But it sure helps, pay for a skid loader when I do that. So, the other thing that I've been doing a little bit lately, side hustle wise, is it's still lumber related, but it's not sawmilling, it's actually logging. So, going through and harvesting a timber and saying, hey, we're pulling out 100 walnut logs. So, there is an opportunity cost there that you have to consider too. It's like, if I pull out 100 walnut logs, for example, the last load we sold that is going to China, we sold 100 walnut logs. There was probably close to 3,500 board feet there. And those 3,500 board feet, some of those were low grade saw logs that I probably wouldn't even touch, but China buys them. I might, if I cut all of that, I probably would have yielded, close to 15 to 20 grand, by cutting it, drying it, whatever. Paying for time on skid load or rental to help load and kind of speed up the process. But I don't have the time to cut that many walnut logs. So at that point, it was easier for us and quicker for us and better for us just to turn around and shove it in a shipping container and ship it to China. I hate to say it, and I know we're going to get flack for it, but there's a lot of walnut in Iowa. So that's kind of... You have to take an enjoyment factor into there too, because I really enjoyed the logging process. Just going out through the timber with a chainsaw, whipping trees down, bucking the logs and dragging them out. I love that. Absolutely love it. So I'll take a little bit of hit to my pocket, opportunity cost wise to do that instead. So speaking of which, though, I do have walnut, white oak, and sycamore still for sale if anybody needs any. I got to get my garage space back somehow.
I think the other thing too, at least something that I consider when I'm doing stuff, is, especially stuff that's kind of out in the public sphere. Of course, that could be someone's home, but I'm more speaking of, public spaces, the opportunity to have work in public spaces. I've very consciously not really gone through the process of making a website for myself and haven't really committed to doing any work for myself outside of work. So I don't necessarily have an inventory that I am proud enough of or even have to put online. And so to me, having the opportunity to work with people here in the community is like having basically like a live portfolio essentially that everybody has access to.
Yeah.
And I really like that factor too. And it's something I think about when I do take on work. Do I want it to be, that's why I prefer it to be more like custom pieces that are out in the public sphere rather than just something that, you could hire, a contractor to do. Again, I'm not knocking contracting work whatsoever. It's just, there's people that do that for a living. They could do a lot more efficiently probably than I could. And so I like to do stuff that I feel comfortable putting my name on and is in the public sphere that is, again, kind of just like a live portfolio of work. So, and I think it's just a good way to, again, contract more work for yourself. So,
yeah. Well, and that's, it's funny because there is the one type of work I would like to do. The other part of kind of side hustle, kind of not really, but going and doing demos for some of the woodworking clubs. Oftentimes they'll give you a small check for doing them. I like doing that stuff. So I will do that, and I like doing that. That's fun. I would, I think, really like at some point during the next few years to get a couple of turning pieces into a gallery somewhere. I think that would be cool. Now, it's one of those things that, depending on what gallery you get into and stuff, on how they price it, if the gallery prices your piece, or if you price your piece, or if the gallery is just there to send a buyer your way and then you pay a small percentage to the gallery, whatever. I think that would be I would enjoy, I think, doing that type of work, doing gallery pieces, turnings, not furniture, because again, a large portion of this comes from enjoyment factor, and I really enjoy turning, so I'm going to do that before furniture most times. So,
what do you think, Phil?
See, I really, I've had dreams in the past of doing woodworking as side hustle, and for me, it's always bumped up in terms of time and how do I price my work where I'm going to actually make money on it. And then it also knowing that that's taking away from
family time,
doing stuff for myself, family time, family time, and also building my own projects, for my house or whatever. So, I've done and will do things for other people, and I enjoy doing that, but I would rather do it in a way of looking at it primarily as I have this place where I am and the skills that I have, and I'm going to use that to help someone else.
Yes,
sure.
So I'm not necessarily looking at it as in terms of profitability. So I will do it because I have these skills that not a lot of people do in our day and age, and I want to pass that along to other people. So that's primarily been through family members, through some friends, but the other thing that I look at it is I like giving gifts to other people. Mm-hmm. So I look at it as I'm quote unquote saving money on Christmas gifts because I'm making something than it is for something else. And when I do have, building something for a family member, it's usually I ask them to pay for the materials and a little extra just for supplies and for a very small hourly rate or per piece rate or something like that. And it's got to be something that I'm want to build.
That's, I don't know, you make a valid point earlier on in your response about, the time we have outside of work and what's the value of that time, whether you call it free time or family time, or, you can call it whatever you want. And I think, again, the way our time is valued here at work, to me, having free time outside of work has been really, really important. And so you do have to just kind of, again, reevaluate and think about, okay, if I'm going to take on a piece of work, I better, like Logan said, I better really like to do it. Of course, the financial aspect comes into it. But again, if you're not enjoying doing it, it doesn't matter if you're making $1 million or $5, it's just, you just mentally, you just don't want to do it. And so it is just kind of
look for ways to not do it.
Yep.
Oh, absolutely. You'll kick it down the road as far as you can, and you'll, start to hate woodworking, or, start thinking irrational things about your state of mind and how, just stuff like that.
Yeah.
So,
well, the other thing that I've thought about, like, I made a couple of these little English miter planes, and I always thought it'd be cool to, and there's a lot of these small plane makers coming up that are starting to make and sell their own hand planes, kind of boutique-y type bespoke tool makers. I was like, oh, that would be kind of fun to make planes and sell them and stuff, kind of as just a fun little side hustle. But I'm like, you know what? Like, one of those little English miter planes takes a solid 7, 8, 9 hours to make, start to finish. It's better for me to go run the sawmill. Like, at the end of the day, like, I mean, yeah, that's a fun thing you could do in the wintertime if you have the time and not have kids and stuff. But yeah, it's just, I have also been enjoying doing the whole, like, I sent Phil a picture the other day of my boxwood collection. Like, I like the whole buying and selling model, where it's like, hey, if I can buy a batch of exotic wood and resell it for some profit, great. Is it, per hour, it's actually pretty decent money, because I don't put a whole lot of time. I'm sitting on the couch with my phone, might as well just make posts and sell it, and then I just got to take 10 minutes to box it up and ship it. So, that's kind of a good way. I mean, and that's, to be honest with you, that is why I haven't been doing a ton of tool flipping lately. My inventory of old tools is growing. It's expanding again. But I just haven't had time to put into fixing them up and selling them like I would like to. That may be another winter project. But yeah, there's ways to do it, man. There are ways to do it. People want to do it.
Right. I think that wraps it up for another episode of the ShopNotes Podcast. If you have thoughts of your own, questions, comments, or smart remarks, I'd love to hear about them. You can send us an email, woodsmith@woodsmith.com. If you watch the podcast on our YouTube channel, you can leave comments there in the comments section, oddly enough. Want to thank Shaper Tools for sponsoring today's episode. They make that handheld CNC router. It's called the Shaper Origin. You can do all kinds of stuff with it, from joinery and hardware installation, cabinetry construction, all that kind of stuff with speed and precision. Right now, you can try it risk-free in your shop for 30 days. If you'd like to find out how to do that, visit shapertools.com. Thanks for joining us, everybody, and we'll see you next week on the ShopNotes Podcast. Bye.